Hello, everyone, and welcome to another VMware Cloud on AWS Customer Success webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking some HCX Service Mesh. It's an update to one of the videos we had earlier on this year. As a reminder to everybody, some housekeeping. Everybody is muted. Please use the Q&A window to ask any questions, or if you're watching via Twitch, you can ask them in the Twitch chat and we will get to them as soon as we see them. We'll try to save a little bit of time at the end as well for questions. As always, I'm Matt Vanderbilt at vCloud Matt. We have basically the almost the entire team of our VMware Cloud architects, solution architects now, I guess we're called. And today's session is going to be led and run by Dustin Spinnern. So, Dustin, you want to give yourself a little brief introduction, and then you can take it away.
Sure. Name is Dustin Spinhern, one of the folks working with Matt on his team. And so today, what we're going to be covering is one of the recent updates to HCX, which is the service mesh functionality. And so basically, what they've done from the end user perspective is they've redone the installer process. And so the process we've been using before tended to take more of an appliance centric view of the HCX world. So in other words, you would install the appliances based on the functionality you needed. Service mesh changes that. So instead of an appliance centric view, they take more of a service centric view. So when you set up the services mesh, the installer, from its perspective, number one, it's they're sort of operating under the notion that they're going to set up a series of templates that will be used for making the appliance installations sort of easier slash automated. And so what you'll do is you'll define these templates as a first step, go through and um, pick the services that you want to deploy, and then as part of that, it will deploy the service mesh, and then it'll deploy the appliances that are needed to implement the functionality that you're looking for. So the installer process is flipped a little bit from what we've been used to in the past. Now, as part of the service mesh uh, functionality, basically what they've done with this, in addition to the installer changes, is they've also taken and all of the future roadmap items, all the new features that are going to be coming out with HCX are going to be based upon the service mesh. And so it's not just a new way of redoing the installer; it's actually a foundation for future functionality. And so that's why it's kind of important to start becoming familiarized with it. And so what we're going to do is today we'll walk through setting up the service mesh. I'll specifically talk about one of the features that it provides us, which is functionality over Direct Connect. So previously, if you've dealt with Direct Connect, you'll know that you'll go and start your HCX install, and then you have to stop. You have to manually contact somebody. We have to do some setup on the back end to make that ride over Direct Connect. And then once we've completed some manual processes, you can continue on, and now your HCX will work over Direct Connect. And so what they've added as part of this is your ability to sort of self-serve on that part. And so I'll walk through that a little bit. Now, I'll caveat this by saying I'm not going to walk through the entire setup. So my HCX is already activated. I've already got the appliance installed. Now, this is just a time saving measure on my part. So sitting there watching things deploy while an icon spins is a little dull. So we're going to skip that. So just to point out a few things here. So number one, in the user guide, so they have done some updates for the service mesh stuff. So kind of go over in their user guide, they're going over the technology, a bit of the install process. They touch a little bit on the self-serve of IPs for Direct Connect. And their documentation is a little bit out of date on this, and so we'll kind of walk through that, what that looks like, and I'll kind of explain how that works. And so let's get started. I'm going to log into our SDDC.
And just for everybody's edification, The banner you're going to see pop up around some funding things because Dustin's credit card expired.
Yeah, it turns out my limit's only $100,000. So
Now, there's an internal fund that we set up for our own testing, so that's actually good for people to see that this is what you'll see if you do run out of funds in your account, and it's something you should address right away, and we're working on it.
okay, so what we have here, this is our internal org, and we've got a few different SDDCs that exist. Now, this one here, this is our sort of semi-permanent one that we use for lab stuff. And so, just to point out a little bit of what this setup looks like, what we're dealing with. So this SDDC has Direct Connect tied into it, and so you'll see here we have redundant Direct Connect set up. Now, when you have Direct Connect, what you're going to see is once you've got the Direct Connect plumbed in and BGP configured, you'll start seeing routes that you've learned from the on-prem environment. In our case, we're receiving a default, and then we're also seeing the routes that we're advertising to the on-prem environment. And so these represent, the management network, the compute networks, but also what we have here is this sort of extra network here. And so what this this is used for HCX appliances over Direct Connect. So the way that the SDDC is set up, if this is a fresh brand new SDDC, the only thing you'll see are routes for the management network being advertised over that Direct Connect. Now, as soon as you go to the compute networks and start adding segments, you'll start seeing those being advertised as well. Now, the way HCX is deployed inside of the SDDC, you have the HCX Cloud Side Manager, which is deployed inside the management network of the SDDC, and so therefore it takes an IP address of that network that it's plugged into. So once you've got it activated, you'll simply go up to you can go up to the gateway firewalls here, and if you want to access the HCX manager, you actually have to create a rule for that. So we've got one called HCXN, basically allowing our corporate IT space to get to the HCX manager. So that's one of the first things you'll do after you've set up HCX. Now, that's just the HCX manager. Okay, so now you can get to the manager perfectly well. Now, when you get when you go to install HCX, you actually want the connectivity to ride over the Direct Connect. And when I say the connectivity, I mean the other appliances that need to be installed. And so those appliances, as we'll see as we're setting up the on-prem environment, they will establish their own IPsec connections to one another. Well, those IPsec connections by default will ride over the public internet. Now, in our case, since we have Direct Connect, we actually want that connectivity to ride over the Direct Connect. Well, in order to do that, we need to have address space for those appliances, to us, to use that will be reachable from our on-prem environment. And so, therefore, what we're going to do, and I'll walk through this momentarily, is we're going to get an additional range of addresses, a very small address range. We're using a /28 here. It could be smaller than that. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to give the SDDC an additional subnet of address space for those other appliances to use. Now, the reason why we have to do this is because those other appliances are not installed in the management network. They're actually installed right below the T0 edge of the SDDC, and so in reality, they're attached to private networks that are using IPv4 link local address space. So they have connectivity when you install them. Now they're not reachable from the on-prem via those IPs because those are link local addresses, and so therefore we need an additional routable set of address space that we can give those appliances, and basically the SDDC will treat this as quote floating address space. So we'll give it in our example, a /28, but they will make /32 allocations from that and assign one IP address, one floating IP to each appliance for HCX, and then advertise the entire space. And once that's done, you can actually reach those appliances over the Direct Connect. Their peers on the enterprise side can establish the connectivity, and that's how we ride over the Direct Connect. And so we'll walk through what that process looks like here in a bit. Now, once we've got the SDDC up and running, we want to actually activate HCX. Okay, so in order to do that, and I'm not going to run through this because I've already done it, you'll go to this add-ons tab, and there would be an activate link here. And so you would click that, and it's going to install the HCX Cloud Side Manager. Once that's done, you can click on this and it's going to pop open another UI. And from here, you can see basically all your HCX instances. We can see that mine is deployed. I can click on this link and it's going to open up the HCX manager. Now, I'm not going to do that from here. This is, I'm going to hop into a jump box in my quote on-prem environment here to do that here in a bit. But this is what you would see normally. You would click on this to open up the HCX interface. Now, activation keys that you'll need for the part of the installation process, those are managed here. So once you've got HCX deployed, it's going to generate its own activation key. That activation key is going to be used for the for the cloud side manager. So you'll need to come in and generate a new one here, basically. And these are all used here. So you would generate a new one, and that's what you're going to use as part of the activation process. So
And
a bit of a
just to jump in real quick there, Dustin, just for anybody that doesn't know, this is all free, included with VMC. So those activation keys are you don't have to pay for it or do anything extra. That's just included with the service.
right, and I realize I'm sort of walking through this in a rushed fashion. Now, the reason for that is because we've already covered a lot of this in previous videos. It's also covered in this user guide. I've also put together supplemental guides here, kind of walking through this where I take a screen by screen shot of this stuff. Now, this is all for the old installer process. I'm going to redo this for the service mesh stuff here shortly. But that's why I'm not spending a great deal of time on this because we've already kind of gone through it.
And we're hoping to have some of these videos put up on our YouTube channel as well for some of the setup. That's where
Right.
some of the older videos that Dustin's referring to as well.
Okay, so this is the cloud side. So now, if we're going through and doing the install, what we've done is we've activated HCX, we've generated an activation key for our on-prem setup. Um, we're basically ready to go now. So the next thing we're going to do is actually get into the cloud side manager, and for that, I'm going to switch over to uh, a jump host in our on-prem lab because I can't actually get to that from here because we're binding over private address space, and I can't get to it from here, so I need to get to it from the lab. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a minute, and I'm going to hop over.
And just so everybody know as well, so this the on-prem he's referring to is this is actually a hardware lab that we run. So there's kind of no smoke and mirrors here. This is actual as close as we can emulate to an on-premises data center.
Okay, so let me know if you can see that. Should
Yep.
be seeing the vSphere client. Okay, so this here, if I would have clicked on that link I was showing, that was the cloud side manager. Now you can see it has a public URL here. Okay, so by default, this thing is resolving to a public IP address. And so if I'm clicking on this thing, it's going to try to go to this public IP address of that HCX manager. Now, as it turns out, I don't have access allowed to that public IP, right? So therefore, I can't get to it from my desktop
So
machine.
there's a quick question that came in the chat here from Marion. It's when will we have the option to update that DNS for H6 Manager to the private IP, just like we do for vCenter DNS?
Right. So that's something that we've submitted a feature request for. There's an issue that exists for it. We're tracking it internally, so we're trying to get that one prioritized as much as we can. So
So
hopefully soon.
soon TM.
Okay, so continuing on. So that brings up an interesting point. So this is resolving to public IP address right now. Okay, so that presents a problem from a couple of reasons. Number one, if we're using Direct Connect, probably don't want to connect to the public IP address. We want to use the private IP address of this machine, right? So I've had to address this in a couple of ways. And so number one, on this actual jump host I'm on, I actually just took and opened up the Etsy host file of this specific machine, and I created a specific entry for this using the private IP address. And so that's how come I can actually get to it. Now, what we'll end up doing once we've got the enterprise side manager installed as well, the enterprise side manager also needs to connect to this cloud side manager on its private IP address. And so therefore we have to do something similar. So we have to go to the enterprise side manager, create an Etsy host entry for the private IP address, so that way it can resolve private IP, can connect over the direct connect. Okay, so I'll walk through what that looks like here just a minute. But let's assume that we've got this set up. I can access the cloud side manager. We've done our Etsy host entry, and so when we get in, this is what we're going to see. So this is the cloud side manager. So the first step in the process, we want to actually enable the service mesh. And so if we go to administration and interconnect configuration, click this button. And I've already done it, so I'm not going to do it again. But what will happen is this thing will generate some profiles on the cloud side that we need. So number one, it turns on the service, and then it configures all the profiles automatically on the cloud side. So we'll go through what the profiles look like here in a bit, but suffice it to say, it does its own setup on this side. Okay. Now, the next thing that we need to do, because we're using Direct Connect, is we need to create that /28 that I was pointing out earlier that will be used for the other appliances. And so we can go to the multi-site service mesh, go to the network profiles, and these are the profiles I was mentioning that are automatically created. And we'll go into what these are in more detail as we're going through the enterprise setup. But for now, what we want to do is network profiles, and we'll see that we've got a bunch of them that are already created in here. Now, the one we care about right here is the Direct Connect network. Okay, and so if I go through and edit this, the way I allocated that /28 address space for these appliances is by creating an IP pool here. And so basically I've said I want a prefix length of /28, and then I specified the address range that I wanted to be usable. Now the UI right now doesn't appear to let me enter the entire /28. I've basically had to omit the what it considers to be the base and broadcast address, and so I had to use the entire /28 for my range would have been 240, 1072.66.240/28, but I've had to go through and do 241 to 254 manually. Okay, so once I've done that and updated this, that's what gives me that pool of addresses that I can use to bind, basically use for those appliances that we're going to install on the cloud side, and then it makes them reachable through the Direct Connect.
So Dustin, I just want to jump in here, maybe take a second to talk about how to determine what size of pool you need for the appliances, just so that, here we chose a /28, but depending on what type of environment you're setting up and how many appliances you're ultimately going to need to have deployed, that might determine what size prefix to use in your particular case, right? So every we call fleet appliance requires an IP address from this pool, and that the fleet appliances are the interconnect appliances and the layer 2 concentrators. So when you're using the service mesh, you actually have the ability to deploy more appliances than you did with the previous method. If anyone is familiar with that, that limited you to a single interconnect appliance per vCenter or HCX manager. This one, the service mesh actually allows you to get a little more granular, and you can deploy multiple interconnect appliances. So you need to sit down and figure out exactly how many IPs you're going to need for the number of appliances you want. So you can deploy up to 1 interconnect per cluster to get greater throughput in parallel if you have the network bandwidth available. And you can also scale up your network extensions up to 1 layer 2 concentrator per network. You can't currently use multiple layer 2 concentrators on a single network. You can use, conversely, up to 8 networks on a single layer 2 concentrator, as long as they're all on the same DV switch. So based on that, determine how many IPs you're going to need, and then choose the appropriate size IP lengths for those appliances.
And just to jump in real quick for everybody, that was Michael Kolos, one of our other architects, our team. Just a follow up question to that, Michael, is can this be updated after the fact?
You're going to have to come and redeploy the appliances if you change the IP range on it. So I believe you can extend the pool if you have additional space. But if you need to change the pools, you might need to redeploy appliances. So it's a lot better if you can get it to the right size up front. But yes, you'd be able to come and edit this again as Dustin's in here editing it. It's just if you change the pool altogether, you can only add a single prefix advertised in this UI. So if you have to have a separate space, if you can't just extend onto the block, then you might need to redeploy all the appliances, which would be somewhat disruptive.
Right. Yeah. Redeploying would be, that's a good point on moving to service mesh as well. So for people with existing setups, that want to move to this, number one, we had a case where, a customer actually needed the additional throughput, the additional interconnect appliances, and so they wanted to move to this. Now, how do you do that? Well, if you've got an existing setup, you can do it. However, you need to make sure that you don't have any existing migrations going on or networks extended. And if neither of those are true, then you can remove the interconnect appliances, remove the L2 extension WAN opt, and basically pare it down to just the managers, and then essentially go through and update the service or move to a service mesh install. And so that's sort of what it requires to move to this. Similarly, if you wanted to change this range, you'd have to undeploy all of those appliances and then sort of, I wouldn't say completely start from scratch, but you have to redeploy all the fleet appliances. Okay, so moving along. So once we've created this pool of addresses, what should happen is we should see what we saw in the other UI, which is that /28 starts propagating over the direct connect. And now this address space becomes reachable from the on-prem environment. And so it will be this address space that is used by those interconnect or the fleet appliances as we deploy them. So like I said, as we deploy them as part of the service mesh config, they will draw real IPs, which are, I believe, in the link local address space, but then they will be allocated /32 addresses from this range. And those /32s are what you'll actually use to connect when you're reaching these things. So that's the cloud side setup. Now, in order to do the enterprise side setup, you would grab this link right here. That's going to generate a download link, and it's going to get you the OVA for the enterprise side manager. And so you'll go through and deploy this thing, just an OVA template, and I've got mine deployed right here. And so as part of this, I've stuck this on what we call our management network in this lab. And so you can see it's real IP there. Okay, so once this thing is deployed, we're going to go through and we're going to pull up the web UI. And there's a little bit of setup here to go through. And as part of the deployment, you're going to provide passwords for this thing. And so whatever IP address you assign this thing to when you deployed it, that's what you're going to log into on 9443. Use the credentials you provided as part of the setup. And when you log in for the first time, there's going to be a little bit of setup where it's going to want to know where your site is located. You have to provide the activation key, do some role mappings, things like that. And so there's a little bit of setup you have to go through. Once that's done, you'll restart the HCX manager. It will go through and deploy UI components into into your vCenter here, and you'll see an HCX UI component there. And we'll see how this thing behaves. It was acting a little slow on me this morning. I think somebody else may have been doing something in this lab.
And just so everyone knows, this is obviously a live demo, so you have to bear with us perhaps a little bit. But this is, again, no smoke and mirrors. We just wanted to show the real deal.
Dustin, maybe while it's loading, do you have a SSH or PuTTY
Yeah,
set up there?
that's a good point.
The host one?
So that's a good point. So what we needed to do here, the other side of the setup is once we've got this thing up and running, it actually needs to be able to talk to the cloud side manager on its private IP address. And so what we're going to do is log into this. And you can see what I've done here is just in the Etsy host file. So I've already done this, but I've just created a entry for that public URL of that cloud side device. And so basically the URL that we've gotten from here minus the HTTPS and all the stuff after it, and just pointed it to the actual private IP address of that cloud side HCX manager, which I can get from the VMC console. Once that's in place, we can now access, or the HCX managers can communicate over the direct connect. All right, so this thing hangs up for some reason on me. So this was doing this earlier this morning. I'm not sure why. The one thing that I did to resolve this was
Maybe
restarted
try it in Chrome. Things work faster in Chrome.
Yeah, we can try that. Let me see. Yeah, it may have just been a UI thing. Okay, so once we've gotten to this point, so we've installed cloud side, we've given our allocation to the SDDC for the private address space, we've set up our Etsy hosts, so everything can communicate. We have connectivity over the direct connect. So the next thing we want to do is go through and actually create our service mesh. And so normally the old installer, what you would have done is gone through and installed the appliances themselves from this UI. Now this new one is basically going to use this multi-site service mesh setup. So let's go through what this looks like. So like I mentioned before, this is operating off the notion of templates. And so we're going to create a series of templates for use with this setup. And once we've got the templates created, we're going to create a service mesh as the last step, and we'll pick the services that we want as part of that service mesh, and it's going to deploy the appliances that are needed to enact that service mesh. And so the first thing we're going to start with is a compute profile. And so the compute profile is basically just a profile we're going to use for deploying the other fleet appliances. So basically it's going to ask us what storage we want to use, what clusters. We're going to create a network profile as part of this. Network profile is basically saying what networks are these things attached to. We're going to give it a name. And then here is where we're going to choose what services we want. And so you can see that they're all selected by default. And so this is the service-centric view the HCX uses. And so just as an example, I'm going to disable DR. So we don't want to use HCX DR for this. Okay, and so the cluster I want to deploy to, and so that's fine. The data store. And then network profile. And so let me go edit this really quickly. Um, I thought I deleted this thing, but it looks like it's still there. So network profile. So obviously I already had one existing, and so you wouldn't if this is your first time through. And so network profile is basically going to say, we these these appliances need or they have a certain number of interfaces, namely just management, right? But they need to know what network to connect to and what IP addresses they can use. And so as part of this setup, what we're going to go through and we're going to choose a network. So I'm using VLAN 1050 in this case. This is my management network in this lab, giving it a name, and then I have to define an IP pool. So basically, the address space that is reserved for use by these appliances. And so VLAN 1050 is a /24, and so I've created that here. The default gateway is believe that is correct. Now you'll notice on the IP pool on the cloud side manager, this is very similar to the IP pool that we did on the cloud side for that /28 we used. Now the difference here is that that /28 in the on the cloud side, I mentioned that was a floating range, right? So therefore it doesn't have a default gateway. It doesn't make sense in that context. But this IP pool is an actual VLAN, and so therefore it has a router on it, things like that. And so for that, I'm going to provide the default gateway address, the prefix link to that subnet, the DNS server that I want to use, DNS suffix, things like that. Well, now I've also need to provide the range of addresses for that network. And so actually, it looks like this is slightly incorrect here.
So just while you're doing that, Dustin, there's a question came in. With HCX and VMC, is there a way to increase WAN opt tunnel max throughput without redeploying?
I believe you can. So that was correct me if I'm wrong, Michael. That was something you could previously do in the CLI.
Yeah, that's not related to the service mesh. There is a command line way to do it. Normally, we do recommend doing the redeploy. It's easier to execute, but if that's not an option, you can engage our chat support, and there is a command line way to change the bandwidth, but it's a little complex. It's not really a user friendly interface, so that's why we typically prefer the redeploy option, which is a little user interface wise friendlier. Unfortunately, it's a little more impactful, but it is possible.
All right. So just to summarize what I've done here. So in my lab, I just know offhand that, for this demo, I'm going to deploy 2 fleet appliances, well, 3, but 2 of them that require IP addresses. So I've got my interconnect and I've got my L2C. And so therefore I need 2 addresses. Now in this lab, I just happen to know that we've reserved these 2 addresses for this specific purpose. And so therefore I'm creating an IP pool, just manually listing out 2 exact IP addresses. If I had a range that I had set aside, I would, I'd put it through like a dash and just show a range here. And so that's what we're doing here. So now I've got a network profile. Okay. And the uplink network profile it's asking for is just saying what are my uplink addresses? How do I connect to the internet? And so in my case, this is a flat network, and so I'm using that VLAN 1050 for basically everything. Okay, and then I believe last step is to choose the DVS, and so the DVS is basically used for network extension for the L2C, and so it's asking what DVS am I going to use for networks that are being extended, and so in our case, we've got this DVS. Okay, now at this stage, what it's showing you here is the various appliances of HCX need to be able to communicate to each other. And so over the WAN, which in our case is a direct connect, what it's saying is we need to be able to connect out to the cloud side components on these particular ports. Okay, so these sources need to be able to talk to these remote appliances, and you can get these addresses once they're actually deployed on these particular ports. And so if you have any firewalls on your network that are filtering outbound traffic, this is stuff you want to note. And again, this is in the user guide as well, but you go to your security team and have them open up these ports. Now, LAN connectivity, basically the appliances need to be able to communicate to one another on the enterprise side. Now, typically, you're deploying these on one management network, so this is less of an issue because there's not generally a firewall in place there. But if you were to happen to spread these across multiple networks and you were filtering internally, then again, it's just listing all the ports that need to be connected, all the connections that need to be able to be in place for these appliances. And so just the guidance here is what this is. Okay, so what we've done there is we've created a compute profile as a sub workflow that we created in a network profile. And so the next stage of the install is we need to do a site pairing. Okay, and so this is asking us for the cloud side manager's URL. Let me grab that out of the other window quickly. And the login credentials for this are going to be the managers, the cloud side manager is basically using the same credentials as your vCenter server. So I can get that out of the SDDC. Okay, so once I've got that in place, it should be able to connect if everything's working in our favor today. Okay, so again, you'll note I put in that public URL. Now, because we've done the Etsy host entry on this enterprise side manager, it's able to resolve to private IP address. Therefore, our connection went out over the direct connect to that cloud side HCX manager, was able to establish the site pairing that way using the credentials that were auto generated as part of the SDDC setup. So now we have a site pairing. So the final step of this is to create the actual service mesh. So we're going to use our enterprise side HCX manager to our cloud side. So it's just going to choose those. If we would have had multiple site pairs, we could have, obviously chosen something different from this drop down, but we only have the two. So what this is asking us for is our compute profiles that we've created. And the reason it's asking for this is because it's getting ready to actually deploy fleet appliances. Now on the remote side, like I said, when you activate HCX and turn on the multi-site service mesh feature, it auto-generated the compute profile, network profile, et cetera, on that side. So we already have those existing. And then again, it's going to give us the option of reviewing our services. So I'm choosing everything except for DR. And then this is giving us an option to override network profiles at this stage. So we're not going to override on this side. The cloud side, we're going to use the Direct Connect network. And then our WAN opt bandwidth here, and I'm just going to leave that as it is. And then a final review of the topology. And so one of the things they've got in here is, if you probably noticed along the ways, they're diagramming everything just to kind of show you what things look like.
So just a quick question here as well. Because when will Service Mesh become GA? So this is experimental. So it is GA now.
That's a good question. So it's I don't know the answer to that. So it's a new feature. It's been out. I think they released it 2 releases ago. So we'll see. I think it's probably one of those things that they're just letting it bake a little bit before they finally declare it as actual GA.
And then there's a follow-up question to that too. Is also what is the upgrade path from going to the current model to the mesh? And I think that Michael touched upon that briefly earlier.
Right. The upgrade path is basically you stop any migrations you have going on. You tear down any network extensions you have. You upgrade the HCX manager on both the cloud side and the on-prem side to make sure that you're up to the version that supports this, and then you can go through and redeploy the fleet appliances using the service mesh deployment that we just walked through. And so that's how you move from one to the other. I'm not sure that they have any plans to do a direct upgrade to this. I sort of doubt it, but that remains to be seen. Okay, so my last step, I'm just going to name it something. This service mesh. Now, once it's gone through this final step, it's going to start deploying the fleet appliances. And now one thing you'll notice is a change from the previous way you were doing this before. You were going through and deploying them one by one. Now what it's going to do is it's actually going to deploy these in parallel. So it will deploy the L2C, the interconnect, the WAN up, all at the same time. And so it kind of cuts down on the install time for these bits of it. Now, obviously, you've gone through and had to do a bunch of work on the compute profiles and network profiles. So for the average person, the time saving may be actually just a wash, right? So you've had to go through and do all this previous setup to get to this, but it installs it in parallel, so that portion of it is a bit faster. And so now this is going to take 5 minutes ish, something like that, typically. And so what we should see when this is all done is that we'll have all of our appliances installed, and then as those things come online and their services come up, they will start establishing tunnels to one another. And so that's going to take us a few minutes, and so we've got a few minutes to kill here. So if there are questions,
perfect time for questions. The Q&A box in Zoom or in the chat window on Twitch. So I guess perhaps I'll have a question in general, seeing as there's not any coming up real quick here. Is so why would you want to do this over the traditional method?
Number one, the future features that are coming out, they're going to start building on top of this. And so namely, one of the features that will rely on this is the cloud to cloud HCX functionality. And so once that is GA'd, I believe it will require the service mesh setup. And so the cloud to cloud, for people that aren't familiar, will be the HCX setup between 2 SDDCs, for example. So today we've got enterprise to cloud, which is what we're doing here. But they're also preparing to release a cloud to cloud function. So you can take 2 SDDCs, set up HCX between them, extend networks, move workloads, all that stuff. And so that will rely on the service mesh. We've also got the features for people that aren't interested in cloud to cloud, for example, but they have direct connect, for example. Just the ability to self-serve on the address space, for the fleet appliances on the cloud side. I mean, that right there is a reason to do it, just because you don't have to manually deal with chat support and have somebody manually do a config and wait around for that to happen. You can kind of put that in your own control.
Sure. So we have another question come in here. So, how would you go about creating redundancy of your HCX fleet appliances to ensure your stretch nets don't fail due to an HCX interconnect failure?
So redundancy, so you don't add redundant appliances for the L2Cs. It's something we've talked about, and Michael can probably comment on this a bit as well. But the redundancy is, it's not like a traditional appliance. When you think of the traditional hardware world, when you set up a VPN or something like that, typically you're dealing with multiple appliances. Those appliances are doing some sort of keep alive between them. There's a lot of complexity that goes into making sure that both of them don't become active at the same time, because then you end up with, in our case, if we were doing an L2 extension and you had multiple appliances and they had to have some sort of heartbeat between them, something like that, and that failed for some reason and both of them became active, well, now you've got an L2 loop, which ends up causing production outage, right? So that's always been the problem with the redundancy, particularly on L2 extension type appliances. You can easily create loops. Now,
Yeah, and I can add some more details. You mentioned Dustin, because this is a pretty common question that we get. Obviously, like you said, people are used to the traditional networking way where everything has to be in HA pairs. And I mean, to a certain extent, that's still valid in the virtual world, although it does change a little bit. And essentially the strategy, as you described, that has been employed with HCX, there are basically two ways to improve availability. So the first thing, I'd actually, just responding to the question, I just wanted to clarify. So the interconnect appliance actually has nothing to do with the layer 2 network extension. It's strictly the layer 2 concentrator appliances. The interconnects and the WAN optimization handle the replication traffic only. So it's two.
Oh, sorry. Was I answering the wrong?
No,
I was probably talking about the wrong plates.
I mean, the person who asked the question can potentially clarify if we're not, but I think that's why I wanted to clarify. I think that the question is concerning network extension reliability, but it was also some potentially some confusing wording around the interconnect appliances and their role. So I just wanted to clarify that the roles are.
Yeah, he's correct. It's the stretch.
Okay, so what they're the two strategies that have basically been employed to help redundancy are one is that vSphere HA is generally enabled, so we would expect that in VMC it's enabled. So if there's a host failure, for example, in VMC on the SCDC side, vSphere HA will kick in and restart the appliance. So that's one level of redundancy. You would want to ensure that you have the same level of availability on-prem where you're deploying these appliances. So don't deploy them to a single host. You'll want to put them in a cluster with HA enabled with at least two hosts, ideally a couple hosts or three hosts, whatever is appropriate. The other strategy that's been used is the efficiency of the appliances themselves and their startup speed. They're actually they've been tuned and they're very quick to start up. So they actually can do an upgrade and reboot within under 30 seconds, for example. So yes, 30 seconds is more of an outage than you would prefer, but a lot of the HA solutions that are employed to address the situations like Dustin mentioned actually have similar type of failover times, because you really need to make sure that you don't end up with a dual active scenario, because when you're doing layer 2 extension, especially if you have dual active, you end up creating a loop and you're going to take down your entire network, just looping network traffic through it, and the impact can then spread beyond the scope of your networks because you're affecting the underlying infrastructure as well. So those are the two main strategies. Is just quick ability to restart. So if there is a failure, you're back up and running very quickly. Whereas when you have HA, that adds a lot of complications. And then using vSphere HA to help that restart process if needed, and also the quick restart helps during upgrades. The other strategy that helps, and it's not that it helps availability, but it helps minimize your impact, is to deploy more of these appliances. So I mentioned earlier that you can deploy up to one appliance per network stretch. You can combine them and deploy up to 8 networks, but you could also go down as far as one appliance per network extension. That's a good strategy if you're doing this long term. And we have customers who do this strategy, a single appliance pair for each network. yes, it's lots of appliances, but you make sure you maximize your performance because that appliance is only doing one network, and you minimize your impact if there is a problem with an appliance, or if you need to do an upgrade, that one appliance will only take down a single network at the time. So those are the strategies, and for the most part, it actually works pretty well for customers. And simplicity is often a better strategy than complexity and higher availability solutions in the long run when you actually look at the overall solution. So um, I understand it's not considered HA, but the availability is still pretty reasonable for most cases.
Okay, so the service mesh has finished deploying, and so the appliances are all deployed on cloud side and on the enterprise side, and so now these things are booting up, probably starting their processes. Once that's done, you'll start seeing that these tunnels start establishing between them. And so what we see here are the appliances that were needed to enact the service mesh that we defined. So basically, we've got an interconnect appliance, which is again what does the replication. Anytime we do a migration from one point to the other, it's using this interconnect appliance to actually do that. Now the interconnect appliance is using this WAN opt appliance, and so the WAN opt appliance is what is doing the deduplication and compression over the network. And so, for example, you may see a gig of replication traffic coming into this thing, but 250 meg coming out, right? And so the last piece is the network extension appliances, and so this is for doing our extension our extensions of networks from the on-prem environment to the SDDC side.
So we just had a couple more questions come in. So the first question is, what about HA for the connection itself? If you just have one direct connect, can you use the public internet connection as a standby in case of direct connect failure?
In the current workflow, no, that wouldn't be possible because your DNS resolution is resolving to private IP address, right? So if your direct connect fails, you have no path to between these appliances, and so conceivably, if they had some way of flipping that name resolution, then possibly that would become doable. It would be a manual operation, though. Now again, this is all theoretical because it doesn't exist. But that would be the first problem I would foresee with this. So in the case of my setup, we've got redundant direct connects.
And then there's a follow up or another question, different question is on the subject of upgrades. What type of upgrades would we expect, and are they going to be included in VUM at some point?
So the upgrades for HCX.
Yeah, I believe so.
I
Yeah.
take it.
Yeah.
So the way upgrades work on HCX, so you've got two types of upgrades essentially. I won't say two types, but it handles it in two different ways. And so you've got the managers, and then you've got the fleet appliances. And so the managers, what you'll see is when you log into this thing, it'll say update available, and they release these things every 2-ish weeks.
And just where you'll see that is where that banner is along the top. There will be a banner that says update.
Right. I don't remember exactly where it shows up, but somewhere in this it shows up that there's an update available. And so when you see that, the order of operations is that you would log into the cloud side manager. There will be an update button, and so it's going to do basically an in-place update. So it's going to download the code it needs. It's going to restart services, and that's really an out of band because it's a management plane component, and so it really shouldn't be disruptive. Now, once the cloud side is done, you'll do the exact same thing on the enterprise side, and so now your HCX managers are upgraded, and now you need to upgrade the fleet appliances, and the fleet appliances they do their upgrade slightly different because they are in the data plane, so they have to kind of cut them over. And so the way that works is there will be a download and redeploy, something like similar to that. So a redeploy option. So you'll click this redeploy option. It's going to go out and it's going to download new appliances. It's going to install them in parallel, and then once those things boot up and the services are started, it's going to do a transparent cutover. So it'll cut over between the existing appliance and the new appliance, and that cutover is minimally disruptive. And so, in other words, when you cut over the replication appliance, it has to reestablish its VPN connection. So you're going to get a bit of packet loss there. Not a big deal. That thing will recover. Now, it does also impact the data plane. So the network extension. So if you have networks extended, plan for a brief outage of that because that's going to be disruptive. It's going to tear down that VPN tunnel, reestablish, and so you will end up with a bit of packet loss there. Now, exactly how much it sort of varies, right? So we've I've seen this happen really pretty quickly where you drop a packet or two, but I've also seen it go for 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and so it really just is sort of variable depending on your infrastructure. And so do that in a maintenance window. Just plan for that to be disruptive. It's a good strategy anytime you do an upgrade. Okay, so continue on quickly since we're down to like 5 minutes. I want to show the network extension workflow quickly. And so as you saw there, I realized I just switched from the screen quickly, but our tunnels came up, right? And so that means the tunnels between the replication, the IX appliance and the L2C are up and running. And so therefore I could go through and start migrations if I had a test VM to migrate, which I don't today. And I can also do network extensions. And so network extensions, I'm going to click this extend network, and then it's going to present me a list of networks on this DVS that I have available to extend. And so I'm going to just randomly choose one that looks safe to extend. This one looks pretty safe. So we'll choose this one. Okay, and so what this is going to do when you extend a network, it actually just creates a duplicate of this network on the SDDC side. Now, what you'll notice, if I have time, I'll switch my view over. What you'll notice is what it's doing is it's creating a new network, and it's going to create a disconnected network. And so what that means is it's basically a network that is not plugged into the SDDC's CGW. Now, we have to provide a gateway IP and prefix for this network. And so in my case, I'm just going to make one up. Okay, now I'm making one up because I don't actually know what the address space of this network is. But we're going to assume it's this right here. And so what we're doing is when we extend this network, what we're saying is, by the way, the default gateway and subnet mask of this network that we're extending is this value here. And when I create this stretch here, what it's going to do is it's going to, like I said, it's right now it's going off and it's creating a disconnected network in the SDDC, and it's propagating one of the fields of this type of this network type with that information I just provided, so the gateway IP address and the subnet mask, and it stores that information on that network itself, but it doesn't actually plug that into the CGW. And the reason why it does this is so that the SDDC is aware of that address space that you intend to use. And so the idea here is that we're extending a network. We're going to be moving VMs over to that network, and then at some point down the road, we will have completely evacuated, the subnet on the enterprise side, and then we'll do a network cutover. And so a network cutover means we're basically deleting the old network on the enterprise side, and it's going to become native in the SDDC. And so in order to do that, obviously we have to have the network evacuated on the enterprise side, other than the default gateway, right? So everything else needs to be off that network. And then once we do this teardown, and I'll show you what that looks like once this is done. We're doing this network cutover where we actually plumb in the CGW with that address space that we've told that we want to use. The CGW assumes the IP address of that default gateway, that information that you've provided, and then your VMs start using the CGW as their default gateway. And so that's a process that you can control from this side. Now you can also control it to a degree from the SDDC as well, by just converting a disconnected network to a routed network. Now you'd want to make sure that you don't have this extended if you do that. While this is doing this, let me see if I can. I'll get logged back in on the other side. This is probably going to freeze up when I switch over.
And just for everybody as well, I'm just launched a poll, so hopefully everybody can get a chance to do that before they need to take off here at the top of the hour. That'd be appreciated if you guys could respond to the poll.
Since I switched my view from that remote desktop, the screen is probably frozen, is what you're seeing. I'm trying to log back into the SDDC on my other browser, and so as soon as I do that, I'll switch over.
And while we're waiting for that, I can throw in some commentary. So, just for everybody's awareness, we do these webinars every 2 weeks. We do that at this time, and then we do a more APJ friendly time at the other one, which is late afternoon on the West Coast. We also do office hours every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in respective time zones. So, Tuesdays Americas, it's usually at this time. Wednesdays is EMEA, and Thursdays is APJ. That's an open invite on Twitch. There's also a Zoom along with it that anybody can drop in and ask any questions at any time.
All right, so back in the SDDC view, so I'm going to drill down into this SDDC. And if I go to the Network and Security tab here, what we should see if this thing is done, if I click on my segments, we will have an extended network here. Okay, and so you'll note that it's a disconnected network, so not plugged into the CGW, and it's reserved this address space here for when we disconnect. So now the assumption is that we will now migrate VMs into this network from the on-prem environment, and when we're done with that,
Just a quick question here too: is there a maximum number of stretch VLANs per extension appliance?
there is, I don't remember offhand what that number is. Michael, do you
I
happen to
think
know?
Michael said he had to drop it. I think it was.
Oh, okay.
I
Well,
think he
we'll
said
have
it
to
was
come back to that
8.
one. I don't remember. I don't recall that number off the top of my head right now. So let me just quickly. I know we're running out of time. Let me switch this back over. So I'm going to walk through now that this thing is done. Extension complete, and so now if I've done a migration, all my VMs are moved over. This subnet theoretically is now evacuated, and so now I'm going to do a network cutover. Now the workflow for network cutover is as follows. I'll do this unstretch, select the network that I want to unstretch. And then what it's going to do is it's basically tearing down the L2 extension for that particular subnet. And then what will end up happening, I may have missed the box that I needed to click. I did that a little bit quickly, but what should happen is on the SDDC side, once it's done, it will convert this over to a routed network.
All right, so we're doing a little bit of overtime here. So no, I
Yep.
don't want to. People, that if you have any questions, you can still ask them. We can hang out for a couple more minutes. But I just wanted to take this time to thank Dustin for the presentation. And again, this is as live as we can get, and you can kind of see that it is a relatively easy install. There definitely is some advantages to doing it via this route versus via others. And yeah, we'll keep updating as to when this becomes generally available. And I'd like to thank everybody for their time as well, and like I said, in particular, Dustin. Vasily, the office hours are just an open invite. If you can get access to twitch.tv, that's where we do a lot of this. Perhaps send me a private message. Actually, I think I can get your email address and I can send you an invite. I'll send you all the invites and you can make with the best one particular to your time zone. And like I said, we do that every week just to make sure that everybody has a good opportunity to come and ask us questions. And like I said, every 2 weeks we do this more formal type presentation, and we try to keep it. And we're also open for suggestions for anybody that has a particular ask for what they want to see in the coming weeks. Definitely send it to me either on Twitter at vcloudmatt, or you can email us at cloudcs@vmware.com with any suggestions or ideas that you'd like to see in the future, and we'll definitely try to accommodate that.
Yeah, the last thing that I was going to show, and unfortunately, I think I missed the checkbox. So in that unstretched workflow, there's a checkbox up there that says, by the way, plumb this thing into the SDDC. If you don't check that, what's going to happen is what you see here. So it's just going to simply tear down the L2 extension. This thing is going to remain a disconnected network. And that may be actually what you want sometimes. If you want to just disconnect something because it was a temporary stretch, you may not want this thing to become native. But when you're doing a network cutover, oftentimes you do. And so there's a checkbox in that unstretched workflow. And if I would have checked that, it would have done the disconnect of the L2 extension, and it would have also converted this thing to a routed network. Now, as it turns out, I can control this from the SDDC side as well now. So I can simply come over here and manually convert that to a routed network. I'm not going to do this because I'm not entirely sure that this address space isn't going to conflict with something on this SDDC. So I'm not going to actually plumb this in, but I could convert it that way if I wanted to. And that would be the end of that. And so that's how you walk through the service mesh installation. The stretch is basically the same if you're familiar with HCX, but mostly just the install and the functionality that service mesh is going to provide in the future is really what's going to drive you towards using that if you're new to HCX. So other than that, that is the end of the demo.
Perfect. Like I said, thank you very much, Dustin. For everybody that wanted to catch back up on this, this will be going up to our YouTube channel afterwards. It's youtube.com/c/VMware Cloud Customer Success, all one word, if you wanted to catch up with something or see something that you missed. Like I said, feel free to tweet at me or email us at cloudcs@vmware.com. Again, I do appreciate everybody's time, and I appreciate everybody for coming out and filling out the poll as well. And hopefully we'll see everybody either in the office hours or in the next couple webinars. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.